Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something away. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversation here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow if you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know like to come on the show and have a chat with me, you can find me on your social media platform of choice because I'm probably there if you are. So the best way to find me is if you go to isaacr11.com, you'll see all the places that I'm at. With that out of the way, I'm just going to get into it. I'm talking to a famous person. Well, they might not think they're famous, but I think they're famous. My guest today is Pierce Boggan. Pierce, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Pierce. I work on the VS Code team and also GitHub Copilot at Microsoft.
And that's why you're a famous person, because everybody knows about VS Code and GitHub Copilot. We're going to be talking.
Turns out they're pretty popular tools.
Sure. And we're going to be talking a lot about AI and coding assistants and all these sort of things. But I'd love to get your story, Pierce, of how you got started. Like, when did you realize technology was the thing for you?
I was in high school, and I think like many in this space, I was drawn to video games. This was at a point when like World of Warcraft was really big.
Sure.
And so for me, like the way I got into tech was I started playing with like WoW private servers. And so you had to like back in those days, you had to like set up like a database like with all the character information and think it was like a MySQL database or something like that, right? You had to like spin up the server and run it locally and like so it was one of these really cool things where like I didn't really even fully understand exactly what I was doing,
Sure.
But it was very personal, right? Like I loved playing WoW and it was cool. I had my own private server that me and my friends could play, and like it started exposing me to some of those basic constructs. Then I started playing with like WoW add-ons and like stuff like that. That was like Lua back in the day. So I was like playing really silly stuff, nothing super useful. But that kind of like my initial like kind of entry into tech, and you're like, wow, you really can just do things with software, right? Because my dad was like an engineer in the biotech space, and it's like there's physical goods, right? And there's constraints with physical goods and materials and things like that. But like the cool thing about software is like, I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche, like hand wavy thing to say, but it is kind of true that like you can kind of create things out of thin air with software, right? And that's super cool, and I think unique to our space.
Oh, for sure. I every day I think about like the stupid anecdotes, like we're tricking sand to be intelligent, right? Like we're using whatever silly cliche. I think like I have a question about WoW. As somebody who never really got into WoW or any sort of MMORPGs.
Yeah.
Were you a healthy user of WoW, or were you an unhealthy user of WoW? And the reason why I have a follow-up as to why I asked that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you mean by healthy or unhealthy? Like in terms of the amount of time I played this game?
Yeah, like you were grinding to 60
my behavior
constantly. Yeah, we were grinding to 60 like constantly.
Well, I think at that time I was in high school, so like it was pretty much go to school, come home, and do whatever. There was life things like family and kids to trade off with. So I was pretty hardcore for like 2 or 3 years. That was after like 2 or 3 years of being hardcore with RuneScape. Before that,
yeah,
remember that game? That was super
RuneScape.
fun. Still around, but yeah, I would like I used to love like grinding, mining, and stuff like that on RuneScape, and like I would listen to stuff and like watch a movie or something while I was doing that, and that was like kind of my typical setup. And the same was true when I played WoW. So it was never like a full attend thing for me, where it's like, you know, it was always like kind of like I'm doing this and I also have something else going on.
Yeah, no, and the reason why I ask is because I remember whenever I think of WoW, there was a story. So there was when I was in college. There was in the computer science department, there was this brilliant kid, absolutely brilliant, but he had a WoW problem, right? And like he would get an assignment and then he would do the assignment like within a day, and then he would just like whatever. And then I don't know, remember the exact story what happened, but his account got hacked and he lost his account that he had been working on, right? And he just lost it to the point where he dropped out of school. And this is like one of like
oh my god,
yeah, like he became obsessed about trying to get back and all that. But like, and the reason why I'm always curious is because I think that there's for whatever reason there is a pretty solid connection between people that fell in love with tech via video games and people that eventually like get into tech and build software and that. And I'm curious for you, like, you know, what do you think it is? Is it just like you're around a computer and then you just kind of learn all the things about computers? Like I have a 10-year-old that they have their own PC we built together, and like they just learn things like by osmosis about a PC. That I'm like, how do you know how to do that? They're like, oh, I needed to do this and I watched a YouTube video and I'm like, okay, cool. So like you're trying to figure out how to solve problems.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think probably it just has a lot to do with the population bias of people. You're spending more, as you say, you're spending more time on computers. Just by nature of this, you're exposed to more computing concepts and you get more into things. And you're also more like the type of person who, like, not that I was the person who never went outside when I was growing
sure.
up, but like there's certain people like who are drawn more to being inside and playing on these machines than others, I think. And obviously, if you're more of that type of person like I am, then I think you're more exposed to these concepts and you're more likely to get into it. I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah, I think
I've
that
thought about it a lot, but I don't have a good answer.
yeah, I think that there's something to like and I've interviewed people that are much older than us. Like I think I'm a little bit older than you, but I think we're a similar age, right? I've interviewed people that are substantially older than us and they talk about how like technology
Mhm.
was like their ability to find community, right? Because, they
Yep.
live in a town and there's nobody that knows anything about computers in their town, right? And I think our generation, like we were kind of introduced to technology at a fairly young age and we found out that about community. So it was like, okay, what is our niche? Do we want to play WoW? Do we want to tinker with breadboards? Do we want to do all these sort of things, right? And I think the question I have for you, and this is guilty, like this is the reason why I got into tech is because I realized there's money in it, right? I love technology and I was like, oh, I can make a lot of money doing this. Like when did you realize that technology was like the only thing that you could ever do in your life?
Uh, it was probably at some point in college.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't like one of the people who was like immediately like I this is my life, right? Like
Yeah.
I know this. Like that's not how it was for me. And I like originally had wanted to be a dentist, which is a
Oh,
very different
sure.
career
Okay.
path. So and I still like even to this day, like sometimes I'm like maybe I just call it quits and I really kind of like the idea of doing something entirely different
Hmm.
that seemingly has almost no skill transfer. Like uh, totally repot my career in my 30s or 40s and go do something different. So I still think about that very frequently. But I don't know. Like I think when I started working at like a startup, I started when I was in college. I started working at Xamarin, which was like cross-platform mobile dev and C#. And like I don't know, like that I kind of grew into my passion over those couple of years doing it. And that was like probably at some point, my freshman sophomore year working at Xamarin, I knew that was the thing. And I didn't have like a super glamorous role when I started. I was like customer support, right?
Sure.
Um, but like it was fun because of playing the tech every day and problem solving, and you see all the things that customers are trying to do. And I don't know, like I found that kind of feedback loop super fun. And so I think that was the moment where I was like, well, I at least know that I'm affirmed in my decision to go get a CS degree and like pursue this at least for the foreseeable future. To be honest, there's many things that I think I've stuck around longer than I was expecting. Like
Sure.
after joining Microsoft, right? Like Xamarin ended up getting acquired by Microsoft, and originally, like when you get acquired, like you're like, okay, like I'll do what I have to do to get my money, and then I'm gonna leave.
Sure. Sure.
To be completely candid, right? And here I am 10 years later. I just got my 10-year anniversary crystal. And so like you never know because like that was a situation where I was like, I don't want to do this again. Like I don't want to work at a big company. I never applied to work here. I never it's always like Microsoft was my dream job or
Sure.
anything like
Sure.
that, right? One day they tell you you work here,
Yeah.
right? But then like there's something about like also, the time here and the people you work with and the products you work on that like you just stick around far longer than you anticipate. So yeah, I don't know. Like I've never been like a big like I have this giant life master plan of
Yeah.
tasks that I have to execute on. I'm like very like all right, constantly reevaluating like a feedback loop of like, okay, I like this, I don't like this, I need to change this, I don't need to change this. And so I'm pretty open-minded into like if there was a point where I was like, oh, technology is not for me anymore, I would actually maybe a surprising thing to say, I am kind of interested in trying something new, like I
Yeah.
said. So we'll see what I end up doing. Maybe in 5 years, if we do this again, I'm like a doctor or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I notably know somebody that was pretty prominent in tech, and then at some point in time, they decided, you know what? I'm not into this anymore, and now they have like a mushroom farm.
Yeah.
So it's just like
Yeah.
I think that there's just some like
Yeah.
some people just get their fill of working in technology, and they just like you
Yeah.
said they need to switch over to something that is so completely different that it works a different part of their brain, right? And I totally relate to that. But
Right.
I want to circle back to what you're saying. You said something that you kind of just toss it in there, and I want to talk about it a little bit. So you started working for Xamarin in college,
Yeah.
and for
Yeah.
for most of the people who watch this show, they probably know what Xamarin is. Eh, but I think it's I want to like talk to me a little bit about obviously when I was in college, I worked at Best Buy, right? I just worked like a retail job. Like you worked at let's be real, like Xamarin at the time was a pretty hot little tech company, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how did
Totally.
like tell me a little bit about you don't need to go through the whole thing, but like go a little bit into how you that was a job in college, right? Which is I think a lot of people that's like a full-time job after they leave college.
Well, it was also a full-time job while I was in college,
There we
which
go.
is a lot, but I wasn't the best student. Let's just say that.
Mm,
I'm not exactly the same as your friend, but I had paid much more attention to Xamarin than I did my studies. That's for sure. No one was hiring me on the basis of my GPA.
sure.
Let's just say that. Yeah. Well, so like it's very similar to the WoW story. Like I remember when I got my first iPhone, and you're like, okay, it's not just a phone, and this is like basically a computer, and you can build stuff for it, and like people building like fart apps and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's still like, you're like, you can build something, right? And so at the time, like you really only had Objective C. Of course, we had no AI. All right. So you're having to go learn Objective C, which wasn't
In
fantastic.
Xcode.
And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
in
In
Xcode, yeah.
Xcode. Yeah.
So which has improved quite a bit
Sure,
over the
sure.
years, but like at that time in particular was very rough around the edges. And yeah, I like kind of struggled through that experience. I was able to do some basic things, but like couldn't really advance super far. And so I started looking around at other ways I could build mobile apps. And so there was like Xamarin, there was like Apache Cordova at that time, which is like web stack, right? There was some Python things, the random stacks as well. But like Xamarin kind of I was drawn to because it was C sharp. I didn't actually know C sharp. I knew Java because that's what my high school taught. And I did like the whole robotics class where you have like the, very basic, conditionals you write in loops for like controlling, where your little robot goes and stuff like that. I forget what they call it, like the Lego thing, Mindstorms, is that what it's called? So I had exposure to Java, and I was like, okay, C sharp's close enough. So I started playing with it. And then this was back in the IRC days. So Xamarin had an IRC channel. And one day I was working like this, all due respect to people who wear khakis every day and button down shirts, but it's not for me.
Sure.
And I was working at this care company doing my internship, as I go into college. And like it was fine, but I was like, that was kind of actually a moment where I was like having some doubt about the space. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I gotta be honest. Like this is just not the culture for me. And so like this is around the time I started playing with Xamarin. And then I start college, and one day I randomly asked, I was like, do you guys have anything for like students? Because like it was expensive, it wasn't free at the time, you had to pay for it. And so Joseph Hill, who was the CEO of Xamarin, happened to be in an IRC the moment I send the message, and he sets me up with a license, and we keep talking, and eventually like so are you guys hiring? And he's like, well, no, but like let's talk. And so we talked, and like I said, I started in customer support and did that for the first 2 years of my career at Xamarin, working full time while going to school at Auburn. So yeah, that was my thing. And then I'd go up in the summer and work in our engineering office in Boston, and it was a great time. And I just like was incredibly drawn to like that style of working, and like it was very different than working in a big company that had very established processes, right? We can move fast. Like even though my role was formally customer support, at a startup, your role is everything, right? You're doing kind of basically every job: sales, content, engineering, product management, right? Marketing, developer evangelism. And so like I thought it was also like super cool because like to the point about curiosity and that being very important to me, like exploring new ideas and concepts and things, like working at a startup super fun because you get to like, I mean, not that all of those jobs were fun when you have to go do them, but you kind of discover what's good, right? What
Yeah.
you like, what you don't like, what brings you energy, what depletes you of energy. Which I feel like if it was kind of funny because I was in charge of hiring all of our college hires for our division for quite some time, and they would ask me like advice, and it was always kind of this interesting situation because I would say like actually like I feel like this thing is to go to a startup because when you
Yeah.
work at a big company, right, you have a very narrowly defined job, which is good because you're not overwhelmed, you don't have a million things going on, but also like you're not getting the exposure to like so many different ideas and concepts, and not everyone thrives in that environment for sure. But like I thought it was so fun that I got to try like every single day I came to work was something so different. And that was enough to hook me. And then like from there, I like was like, I got to keep doing this.
Yeah, I'm gonna make an assumption about you. Like you probably didn't need college, right? Like college was kind of like a means to an end,
Definitely,
right?
I think it's, yeah, I agree.
And I'm fascinated
But
by
at the
people.
time,
Go ahead.
like I grew up in Alabama,
Yeah,
right? So
sure.
like you have to imagine like the cultural pressure to be like, oh, you need this piece of paper
Yep,
that validates everything, right? Um, and the South in general has a lot of, not to get cultural, but like has a lot of like these external validation things that they value. And so for me, like growing up in Alabama, I was very encouraged that I would go pursue this path. Certainly, like I would probably be a lot wealthier if I had dropped out and moved to
sure.
Boston and started working for Xamarin when I was in college. But
Yeah,
at the same time, like there was life things, right? Like I met my wife in high school and we dated all throughout college. And if I had moved to Boston, like when I was a freshman and we'd only dated like our senior year of high school, like would we have stayed together? Probably
sure.
not, right? And
Yeah.
that's so valuable to me. So there's other like, you know, life consequences that would have happened had I not done college. But yeah, I agree. Like I don't think I like really there's nothing really about college that I thought was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I learned this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I mean, I've said this to people a lot. It's like, I don't think college, especially now, I don't think college is as much as about what you learn. Is about like the
Yeah,
networking and also like
that's
just
right.
how to become an adult. Because let's be real, like
Yeah,
every like 18, 19-year-old, like, look, Pierce,
yeah,
I think
totally.
you're a great guy, but I don't know if like if you would have started working when you're 18 or 19, you would have made all of the right choices, right? You need a couple of more years to do that. Um,
Definitely.
I
Yeah,
I so were you all I guess, you mentioned the iPhone and sort of like, the
yeah,
unlocking of being able to like, oh, I can build something and it runs on this little computer.
yeah, yeah.
Was that kind of like the first like, I guess, introduction to a technology app type or stack that you immediately drawn into? The reason why I ask is because
Yes.
like mine was like building MySpace pages. So,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
you can update a MySpace page and you can crash a browser if you put enough good JavaScript in there, good JavaScript in quotes. Um, so like so being able to build something that like would run on people, on the subway or whatever, that was something
Yep.
that was like the most interesting thing to you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you can take it with you anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And like you deploy it to someone else's phone, they have it, and they're like, "This is the app that Pierce built," right? And I mean, the other really cool thing about that time is like it's interesting. We're living through another one of these moments right now, which is much bigger than the mobile one. But there was like a mobile was like a thing. Everyone was like, "What
Oh
is our
yeah.
mobile strategy?" Like everyone thought they needed a mobile app, right? At that time working at Xamarin, of course, we were biased, but we were like, every single developer will be a mobile developer. Like there will be no people building for desktop. There will be no people building for web. They're all going to be
Yeah.
building mobile apps. And so like that's where we were at that point in the cycle, right? And it's kind of funny because like that was its own like fun of like feeling like you're living through one of those waves of like massive progress that's happening, right? The cloud build out was happening at the same time, where it's like we had cloud computing as kind of a thing. So like yeah, that was like a pretty cool moment in time because it wasn't just like, oh, I'm getting introduced to like this tech and this stack. It's like also like you feel like you're riding one of those like big waves of like, oh, how we experience technology as humans also changing, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that when that ended, I wouldn't get another opportunity for it. Like you never know if you're going to get another
Yeah. Yeah.
opportunity for that. Like our space turns over pretty fast, but it was kind of stable for like 10 years after that,
Yeah.
right? So like yeah, and then now to be in the AI moment again, and like it being way more intense than the mobile moment, is kind of fun to experience that again at a different age with a different perspective.
Yeah, before we transition fully into the AI conversation, one of the things that has stuck with me during like the mobile time frame is you have a family friend or a college buddy or
Yeah.
whoever it is, and they're like, "I have an app idea." You're good with computers, you have an app idea. I'm curious because I tried to think of like the other day. Do you remember anybody pitching you an app idea that you said that's never gonna work, and then 10 years later, like, oh, like that's Twitter or like or that's Uber or whatever it is, right? Do you remember like an
Yeah.
actual good app pitch that you're like, nah, I'm not gonna do that, but it ended up being something that is actually valuable?
Nothing like of that magnitude
Sure,
where I
sure,
was
sure.
like, but like there's a lot of kind of what I'll call them like lifestyle business like app things that exist out there that are like for a very specific category that I pay money for today. And like 10 years ago, I would have been like, how can you make a living out of this?
Yeah,
And there's people who make like millions of dollars running this like kind of niche app for this like very specific community. Um, like there's an awesome iOS app called Slopes, like that's made by one dude. And he just like picks his own schedule and he
Yeah.
builds an awesome app for skiing and tracking your skiing and how much you're skiing and your vertical feed and are your friends skiing and can you meet up with them and like just obsessing over that problem. Like I would have never imagined maybe 15 years ago that that could be like someone could not only like just survive, but make a very, very good living building those sorts of apps. And there's millions of examples of those apps on the store, right? So
Yeah.
I think like more of those sorts of ideas where you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of a cute idea, but like, can you really like make money with that? More of kind of that middle class of ideas I was not
Yeah.
really like super optimistic about.
So I'd never heard of slopes before. You're the second person to bring up slopes to me in the last week. And because
Okay.
and first off, I don't ski, I don't snowboard, I don't go out and I don't go up on mountains. But I was talking to somebody and they mentioned the slope app. I'm like, what's that? And they're like, oh, it's like this. I'm like, isn't that like a Strava
Yeah.
does? Like, because I thought immediately it's like, oh, Strava has like some experience, but then
Yeah.
the look on
Yeah.
this person's face was like, no, God, Strava's like corporate demigod, like overlords, right? Compared to like this little slope apps, right?
Well, and Strava, I also use Strava.
Yeah,
If you're not an endurance athlete and you're not uploading your rides or runs to Strava, then you didn't do your ride or run,
yeah,
right?
exactly, right.
But
How are
like
you
it's
gonna
more
be
of
graded? How are
a
people gonna thumbs up your pain, right?
exactly. How am I supposed to feel good about the run I just did if I don't upload it? I have a very sad story where I had a ride last week and my power meter like lost power halfway through and I was like hitting record numbers. I'm like, no one's gonna see this on Strava. It's
No, it's I
pretty
mean,
sad,
but the
but
thing is that it'll be forever in the lore of Pierce, right? It's like, oh man,
that's
that
right.
one workout that didn't get
That's right.
tracked, you're gonna be like in your 60s. You're like, oh, I was so much better then.
That's exactly right. It will live on. Yeah, Slopes is just very specific. It's kind of like least common denominator
Yeah,
versus building for like a very deep scenario. Like Strava is great, right? It does a lot of the basic things because it has to support a lot of activity types, right? I think it's like 50 activity types they support. But it's kind of like basic GPS mapping. Okay, you have that, you have kudos, you have comments, right? Slopes is much more like deep than that
oh, okay,
in terms of like just very specific skiing scenarios. There's another really good piece of software. It's also a hardware device that you attach to your ski boot called Carve. That's also very interesting. They basically have an accelerometer you put on your ski boot, and then they use that accelerometer to basically recommend like how you can improve. So you
oh,
basically
okay,
ski the run, and then if you have headphones in, like, and you have the Carve app open, it transmits that data, analyzes the run, and then says like, oh, your edge angle similarity, which is like how two skis like are tilting at the exact same pitch at the exact same time in your turn, like is not good. Here's a drill that you should work on in the next, and
sure,
it's pretty cool. So like, there's a lot of like specific software that's been built for like skiing, for endurance sports, stuff like that. That personally, like I find that stuff like awesome because I
yeah,
use that all the time. I'm obsessed with endurance sports and skiing, but yeah, I don't know. There's so much cool stuff you can build, right? And especially that moment, like you say, like everyone was pitching ideas and some of them were incredibly stupid and like
sure.
ended up not working out, and some of them were incredibly stupid and ended up being billion-dollar businesses,
Oh
it
yeah,
turns
yeah, yeah.
out. So
No, I mean, as we transition, I do like I just reminded me myself of somebody doing an app pitch to me. And I'm like, no, I can't have that conversation right now because it's ridiculous. I want to transition to the AI talk a little bit. And I think the Slopes app or the other software you're talking about is interesting as like
yep,
an example, right? I'd imagine when that app was
yep,
first built, it probably didn't
yep,
use AI, and now there's probably some
yep,
AI in it, right? Because it would make
for
sense,
sure.
right? It's
Yeah,
like looking at data and then it's making assessments and all of that, right?
yep,
And
yep.
as we transition to the AI, like, when did you realize that this was a thing? Because I have a visceral moment of when I realized this was a thing. Um, I was at so my wife's got a huge family. We go to Vermont, this giant
Yep.
house, and the entire family's there. And
Yep.
my wife's uncle, who's like a similar age of us, I showed him ChatGPT, and he owns a recruiting company. And his immediate response was, "I can have this do a lot of work that I'm doing by hand." Like that was his first immediate response. This is like when ChatGPT was out for like 2 months, like not even 2 months,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Did you have a similar like, okay, this is it experience when you first saw like these generative AI tools start to emerge?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is like working. at
Yeah.
Microsoft, I was working in developer division, and so you're kind of somewhat exposed to like, you know, applications of like pre-LLM AI to development. Like we had this thing called IntelliCode,
Yep.
which was like IntelliSense on steroids. It was a super good product for the time it was built. But anyway, so I had like things like that, and you're like, that's cute. It makes me like a little bit more productive. But similar to maybe a lot of other people, it was kind of ChatGPT moment where you're like, okay, like it can do a lot of things. It obviously had a lot of rough edges, but like I still remember like right after it came out, like I would be copy pasting like code snippets from there into VS or VS Code or whatever I was working on at that time. And that was like, it's funny because that was like, it was so powerful and that was like an awesome moment. It wasn't that long ago. And yet at the same time, it feels like very
Oh, yeah.
naive as a
Yeah.
moment in our AI
Yeah.
journey, right? Compared to where we're at now.
Yeah, no, I think about like this, like the good old days where it's like, oh, like ChatGPT was like it, right?
Yeah.
I think about the wave occasionally, right? Because ChatGPT comes out, people realize very very
Yep.
quickly it's valuable, and then you see like a million companies over the span of like 2 weeks basically turn
Yes.
themselves into ChatGPT
Yes.
wrappers, and then you start to
All the
see,
crypto companies pivoted to AI
yeah,
very
exactly,
quickly.
right? It's like, oh, Web 3 is the new AI. Wait, or is it the other way around? AI is the new Web 3. Anyway, um, but I imagine for you, like working like with developer tools, like
Yeah.
you mentioned like, oh, I put code snippets in here. Like, when did you actually start to realize like, oh, this isn't just like, hey, give me a taco recipe or whatever. It's like, hey, like help me actually like build things, like past like the Stack Overflow copy paste sort of thing that I think a lot of people
Yeah,
did
yeah.
originally when it first came out.
I think there was like different moments, right? Like
Yeah,
I of increasing like ability and like holy crap moments. Like the obviously like the ChatGPT one, and you kind of had like the chat era. And before then we had like things like GitHub Copilot had like ghost text completion and things like that, right? And that was actually very it was very approachable for many people because you didn't have to change anything about how you work, right? Like you open editor, you start typing because you're a programmer, this is what you do. And then chat was maybe a little bit different, but didn't feel quite as like powerful. And then when you got to when we first shipped Copilot edits, that was a big moment
yeah,
for me, and like our moment with AI. Even that seems like ancient tech, and it's only a year and a half old. But like that was basically like you can use natural language, and rather than me having to copy paste the code, it actually updates the code, but it can only
yeah,
operate on one file at a time, and files that I had manually attached as context, right? Um, and then like we shipped agents like maybe 3 or 4 months later. That was another big one when I started playing with that, and I was like, I remember I had to go back to like Alabama for a family thing, and like I was in a hospital waiting room, just like needing to kill time, and I was like, to the iOS apps example, like I don't know Swift, and I was just cranking out Swift apps for
yeah,
various things, right? And you're just like, obviously, like the models at that point weren't super capable, but like they were still capable of helping me build an iOS app purely from natural language in Swift, a technology I've never used before. And then like I would say like late last November was like another moment. That was right when we were starting to get Opus capable models, and like some of the newer OpenAI models were quite capable. And of course, like working on the VS Code team, we work with all the model providers, right? So we get pre-release access to these models because we need to optimize them before release, for all of you using the product. And so you start playing with these things early, and you start to realize like there's a big step change in capability with these things. And like we see this in all of our telemetry, we see this in our own team stuff, like basically from early December
yeah,
onwards,
sure.
and especially January when people had 2 weeks off to go and play with these things and they weren't burdened with meetings and a million other things they have to do every day. Like it's just since then it's been like crazy.
Yeah.
And everyone's really leaning on the agent for everything. So I would say like I had different aha moments of increasing capability throughout the years
Yeah.
as I was working in DevTools.
The Copilot edit thing, I remember the first time I saw, like, because for folks that have not used it, like it basically
Yeah.
scrolls the entire file that you have open and then just update.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very uncanny valley a little bit. Like it's like what is it doing here? And you're like watching it like update text, and it's like I don't know how. And
Yeah.
then at the end it says keep or undo, and you're like you almost want to click the undo button just because like I don't
Yeah.
believe this. I don't believe it just updated like 30 lines off of like a prompt. I mean, I think too, like obviously you fast forwarded like two and a half years of
Yep.
innovation, right? And since then, like we've had like the emergence of like not just Copilot, but other tools in this space.
Yeah, that's right.
Like some are based in the like an IDE or a typical IDE. Some are like
Yep.
new IDEs, quote unquote. Some are
Yep.
like just
Yep.
complete command line based. Um,
Yep.
I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. Is like obviously you have all these different modalities of how you interact. Like, and
Yes.
obviously the answer is probably like a combination of this and a combination of that, depending on the use case. But like for you, Pierce, like what is the mixture that works right for you? Like working in a CLI, working in an IDE, working completely like using like an agentic IDE, like that some of the new stuff that's got in VS Code. Like what is the happy space for you for the work that you're doing?
Um, well, yeah, I think like it's one of those things that like the answer is constantly changing,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
one of the challenges in this space. But like I would say most of my partnership now is very agent first. Like for me, the code is an artifact. Like to some extent, I may look at it, but like you mentioned, keep and undo. Like
yeah,
I have a hook, it just commits all the code, right? I don't care. Like my ultimate gate is like when I send the PR, right? But like for me, let's just like I'm now at the point of trust with the model, especially in the VS Code base, which admittedly we do have some special advantages working in the VS Code base because we're in the training distribution for every single model, right?
yeah,
As one of the world's largest open source repos. So we have some unfair advantage in terms of capability for our repository. That's certainly true. But like I'm basically the point I really don't look at the code anymore.
yeah.
And so that is a very interesting thing to say when you're the PM lead of a code editor.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I mentioned like the moment we kind of had as a team late last year, and I think like that's why our team has been exploring like what does agent first partnership mean? What does like an agentic development environment mean? Like what are the things I actually need, right? What are the new problems I have that are different than the old problems? What are some of the problems we always had that now are more important with AI, and like how do we solve for that? So like that's been a big focus for us in the team. I've also been loving GitHub Copilot CLI.
Yeah.
So if you're more of like a CLI person and kind of that's how you like to bootstrap things with a more lightweight experience, like that's also like an awesome time. Like I use GitHub Copilot CLI very frequently. I do a lot of fire and forget with like the cloud agent. So like if I'm on the go or something like that, unfortunately that's often when I have better ideas than when I'm sitting at my desk.
Sure.
And so I use like the GitHub mobile app and I'm like spinning off things. And not that I exactly want that PR to be like, okay, I can hit merge when I'm done with this, but like it goes and basically does all this pre-work so that when I get back to my desk, like I'm already in a much better state, right? So that's kind of like the main modalities that I use, but it's kind of like an interesting product question at the same time. Like, okay, if
Yeah.
it's changing all the time and we don't know how we're going to partner with this, like how do we build for that, right? Like I'm a product manager to some extent. My job is to have input on like what we're building and why we're building it in the direction
Yeah.
of the product, right? And so like something that we've been spending a ton of time on, which isn't really like legwork that you often see show up in things like release notes, is like all the harness optimization behind the scenes, because that's actually the loop that produces the magic. And the rest of it, I don't want to undersell it, but there's a lot of UX sugar on top of that, right? Depending on the environment you're in, whether you're in a CLI or VS Code or VS or JetBrains or whatever it is, right? The UX is kind of constructed to like what you would expect for that environment.
Yeah.
And so we've been spending a lot of time investing in that core agent loop. But I actually like I said on Twitter the other day, like I'm pretty convinced, like actually I'm unsatisfied with all of the current interaction modalities with agents because
Sure.
they
Yeah.
actually work okay with one agent at a time. But like now we see people running, myself included, like multiple agents at once. And like you start to get this cognitive burden of dealing with the multiple tasks. And these agents are now calling other agents.
Yeah.
And how do you like keep all this in your brain? There's been some attempts in the space at like things like Kanban boards and stuff like
Yeah.
that, which I appreciate the shot on goal, but that's not exactly what I want. But I feel very convicted that like someone will go build the right UX,
Yeah.
and we're experimenting all the time ourselves. And then like it'll be one of those things like in retrospect, we're all gonna be like, we're idiots, right? That we
Sure.
didn't think of this, right? It's so obvious. But like, do we really think like the future for us is like we have 150 chats we're running at the same time? Like that doesn't feel correct to me. So I think there's still a lot more invention on the UX layer that has to happen to make these things really work once you scale beyond a couple agents at once.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like, don't get me wrong, like I love the CLI, but I do think that there are no limitation to the CLI intentional,
Yep.
that the whole reason why
Yep.
GUIs exist, right? And
Yes.
for doing things like managing like a topological graph of agents running, like I wouldn't want to ever see that like a CLI. It like like tried to like mapped out in like ASCII. Like it'd be very at least painful for me. And I'd imagine we also can't think about things like the way we've thought about like editors and IDEs till today,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like you just
Yep.
can't take. I don't mean this in a bad way. You can't just take VS Code and have a VS Code version of something, right? Good, bad, or
Yep.
indifferent. Like VS Code has kind of become like the front door for like all development, which is very funny. Like the VS
Yep.
Code UI. But I'm generally curious, like you know, especially with the multiple agent conversation, right?
Yep.
At what point in time
Yep.
does it become too um, dense, too complex for
Yep.
you to even care? Like you mentioned a bit earlier, like I don't look at any of the code I write. At the end of the day, do you care
Yeah.
about what the agents are doing?
I care about the outcomes
You
they
care about the
produce.
outcomes, right? But like trying to track like this agent is calling this agent and then it's doing this thing, like is that just noise? Because at the end of the day, you all you really care about is the output.
I personally like where your head's at, and I very much agree with this. Like, I think what holds many people back from multi-agent partnership, even just in the current kind of flawed way that this is done today in the space, is they want to overly supervise everything that it
Sure.
does.
Well, that's
And of
because
course,
we've
you
been
can
doing
only
that for the
do
last
so much
70
when you're.
years, right? We've been doing that for the last 70
That's
years.
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, and I actually have an interesting observation on that. So like the trend that I have there's a lot of talk about like junior developers and like what does this mean for them.
Sure.
The irony is actually like I do a ton of customer visits and like talk to teams all at Microsoft. Often the best adopters of agentic are junior developers.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is they have no limiting beliefs about how things should be done. Like as developers, there's good patterns you learn over time. This works, this doesn't work. That bit me when I did that. And that is how humans, as how we've evolved. We're good at pattern matching and we
Yeah.
understand what works and what doesn't. But then how do you deal with something that fundamentally totally changes your behavior and how you work? Those limiting beliefs start to become very painful at that point, right? At the very least, you need to be constantly questioning them. And I think like that's almost something that we think about building VS Code all the time is like, you almost basically have to be planning for something that is impossible to do today.
Sure.
Because you have to have belief the models will be capable of doing it in a couple months. And if you wait 3 months to go build that, then it's plain as day to everyone. Everyone will go build it, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of almost have to like, it breaks your brain. You almost have to like build for something that like as developers, we're very like practical people. Like this works, this doesn't work. These are the limitations of this approach, right? Like, but you almost like in a weird way have to be like, this doesn't work and it's intentional it doesn't work, but I believe it will work with almost no changes in a couple months. And we've been proven right, typically, in believing in that over the past year. But like that breaks the brains of like people who, to your point, have been in the space for a long time. And if you're willing, like that's why I think the narrative around junior developers is wrong because they don't have those limiting beliefs. Now there's other problems, right? They also don't understand architectural trade-offs quite as well and decisions like that, which you actually do really have to impart on the agent. But there's that interesting paradox where like the senior developers actually in theory have the knowledge that could actually give them really, really, really high quality outputs from the agent because they can direct the agent appropriately. But they're often more resistant to the agent.
Yeah.
Whereas like the junior developers are very open to the agent, but are more ignorant in terms of like their understanding of the impact of some of the choices they make on the code base, right? So it's this very interesting thing that I see play out in pretty much every single customer I visit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very curious. I think I personally find it very interesting.
I very much equate it to like kids with touch devices, right? Like you have a kid who's I think there is definitely many studies that have been done. It's like the longer percentage of your lifetime something has been immediately accessible to you, the more you're easily able to adopt it, right? With phones or touch devices or now with AI tools. And I think that that's just is what it is. But I think that one thing that you're kind of hinting at and not really hitting it correctly is like the whole idea of like, okay, what is the input for all of this stuff? And it's like your own thought, you being able to take your thought and turn it into words that can build with context your output. And as you like, and I'll just say this, like the more experienced you are, at least in my opinion, I would think you'd be better at prompting because you have all this domain knowledge. You can articulate it out the way you want. But I think older folks, myself included, we kind of try to treat this as like easy button, right?
Yeah.
And we don't prompt as well. So I guess my question for you, it's like, you've talked to lots of people, like what generation in like initially, in your opinion, is better at prompting?
I think it's the junior
The junior
developers.
developer, right? So
um,
so with that,
yeah,
like how are we going to fix the problem's not the right phrase, but I'm gonna use it anyway. Like, how do we fix the problem as it pertains to like you need to be better at your prompt building? I don't want to use prompt engineering because I don't believe that's a thing. But like, how effectively are you
yeah.
like outlining your thoughts into prose and put it into a prompt?
Yes. Well, I think that's like, why all these tools are adding things like plan mode and stuff, because ultimately what they're basically trying to help you do is construct a very well specified prompt that you can then give them all, right?
Yeah.
And sure, you could YOLO and just throw things into the agent and have it start working, and occasionally that may work. But typically, like basically all the plan is producing some text.
Yeah.
It's
It's
shoved in the
it's
input box.
garbage in,
It's just
garbage out.
also a prompt.
Yeah, it's garbage in, garbage out,
Yeah.
right? You put a I had a conversation with somebody about this a couple weeks ago. Do not expect these things to turn your shitty prompt into
Yes.
exactly what you want, right? And they looked at me like, well, how do I get better at prompting? It's like, well, you have to understand that these things don't know anything. And
Yes.
only the context you provide in the prompt is all that matters. So every thought that you have, if you are building, like if somebody asks you, hey, Pierce, I need you to build a method that's going to hit this data source, and we're going to do these conditional logic checks, whatever, right? You need to, all the things that you would think about as an engineer, you need to put that into the prompt. And this person's response to me is funny. It's like, well, why wouldn't I just write the code if it was that easy? I'm like, well, think about writing an entire app like that. And then they understood
Yeah.
a little bit, but like this, the prompting is hard. And we were talking about this a little bit before we got started. Like, it's not just like one prompt YOLO. It's okay. Are you
Yeah.
using this model? Are you using this tool? Are you using this
Yep.
MCP? Like everything is
Yep.
like completely variable, and the prompt has to be too.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about VS Code is we're all open source, including all of our prompts.
Yeah.
And so actually something you can go do is you can basically go to the VS Code repo on GitHub, and you can like just search for like OpenAI prompt or something like this. And you can see actually we do have a system prompt. Yes, it has basic, responsible AI guidelines and things like this in there. But like actually the prompt you get is there's no like system prompt, like
Yeah.
one system prompt, right? The prompt is dynamically built based off the configuration you select, right? So if you're using, a certain model family, okay, we have model family prompts. Like the Anthropic models typically have these behaviors, right? And we need to prompt it in this way. Same thing for OpenAI, same thing for Gemini. Okay, each also has a different set of considerations for the tools that the agent has access to, right? They have different tool calling patterns that have impact on the trajectory the agent takes over the course of a turn. You have to tune the tool descriptions and parameters for each model. Then you also, for the actual individual model, there's a lot of work that happens pre-launch in our partnership with like Anthropic, OpenAI, and the Gemini team to really refine the prompts in our custom like offline evaluation stack we built with our own benchmark called VSC Bench, where we basically go and optimize for that specific model. And you would be surprised, even between something like Opus 4.6, Opus 4.7, there is actually like meaningful difference in how you need to prompt that, like in an overall agent harness perspective to get the best results. And I can see like how these little tweaks will impact resolution rate by 10, 15%, right? So then if you imagine this for your own prompting, the same is true, right? They're just prompts, it's just text. And so if you have a better prompt for that specific model, even if you were to take that exact same prompt and give it to another model, you may not get the same quality of results.
Yeah.
And it's not because necessarily the model sucks. It's like there's a specific training distribution, which is a product decision, by the way, that team has chosen to do when they make this. And that has consequences, good and bad. So I'll give an example. So the OpenAI folks, they train their models, in my opinion, to be very, very good at instruction following. So basically what this means, if you tell the model to do something, it's going to do it.
Yeah.
And it may over adhere actually to your instruction. Versus like the Anthropic models, they are trained to have a little bit more creativity. So if you come in with a slightly underspecified thing, good and bad, by the way, you may get like divergent implementations because the model is trained to be a little bit more creative. Because I think it's a very interesting thing from the Anthropic team. I assume that they've basically said people suck at prompting, right? So we should not be so coherent to the exact prompt they've given us, because if we do, then to your point, they're not going to get the implementation they hoped
Yeah.
for. And their decision is like, rather than making build an awesome prompt, we're just going to let the model be a little bit more creative. And so these properties are good and bad, right? All of these things have trade-offs. But that's the interesting thing, is like the model you choose really has a lot of impact on how you should prompt it.
Yeah, I think about this too a ton because, over the last year, we've had new like concepts added to this space, right? Like,
Yep.
people weren't talking about tools a year ago. Maybe it's at the
Yep.
level they're talking. People weren't talking about MCP even as close to,
Yep.
and you know, if I'm coming into this space and I want to learn, like, okay, like I know how ChatGPT works, at least from an end user
Yep.
perspective, but like now I need to like use it to better my ability as an engineer.
Yep.
Like what is the in your opinion, what is the proper flow of learning? Is it learning how to prompt effectively first and then moving on to like, okay, now this is what MCP does and this is what tools does? Like, is there a tried and true, I guess, a recipe to like learn this stuff to be to be good at your job, I guess you could say?
Um, well, I think like first, like I always hate when like it's like you have to learn all these things before you can start
These
using the
That's
tool.
kind of
Like
that's my
that's always
point.
been a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
blocker for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think like ideally like you go play with it and then you say like this worked and this didn't work and these were the things I did, and that's have some curiosity, right, about why that might be the case. And then once you have that like basic understanding, you've tried this on a few different projects, because you should also try, if you're new to agents, on many different types of projects, right? Because it's certainly true there is like a distribution of outcomes you'll get depending on what type of project you're working in, what the stack is, right? And so you should definitely try, like we see in our evals, like there's some problems that like it would be shocking to people, because Opus is a very, very, very high performing model, but Opus doesn't perform very well at all in our evals for certain problems. Over all the evals, yes, like it performs well, but
Sure.
there's certain cases where certain models won't do well. So like I typically tell people to go play with it. And then what I usually do, if it's kind of a little involved, but like I basically think it's critical that you understand the agent loop. Because if you understand how an agent works, then you can understand a lot of other things. You can understand, okay, when I'm prompting, what's happening? When I'm adding more tools from MCP, what's happening? If I'm using a skill or an instruction file, what's happening, right? But you don't really understand exactly how those things work if you don't understand the core agent loop and the consequences and trade-offs of these different decisions you might make, right? So then what I recommend is like run Command Shift P, open agent debug log. And the other cool thing about VS Code is like you can actually go see exactly when you type a prompt into your project, what happens. Like what is actually the signature of the API request that's sent to the model? Like what's all the API input, what's the output, right? You can see like all the tool calling behaviors and like, oh, it called this tool and here was the input parameters and here was the output parameters. You can also open the VS Code repo and also just be like, don't understand why this is the case. Like, how does this work in the agent? Why does it work differently for this? And because, again, like all of our prompts are open source, you can actually go in and understand this. We're working on like some content to like help with this problem, because I agree it's not the most intuitive thing. And it also, while the core basics are the same, it does change a lot as well, which makes keeping content fresh challenging. But if you can understand that, then you understand like a lot of things, right? You understand like why like certain prompting patterns of like being like, do this, no, don't do this, now do that, like why that's confusing to the model. You understand like what is the trade-off with adding another tool versus having more instructions. Like I've done customer visits and they have like a 50,000 line markdown file and they're like, well, now the agent has all the context it needs, right? So it should be great. And
Sure.
you're like, well, not exactly.
Yeah.
So there's, just like all engineering decisions, there's trade-offs, right? And so you have to be able to reason about your own project and what makes sense. And that's like we talked about not writing code. Like, what do you do as an engineer? It's like, well, you reason about those sorts of things, right? How do you make sure that the quality of your system stays high? How do you make sure the performance doesn't degrade? How do you make sure the architecture doesn't drift? And this is true for one agent, but if you're running 10 agents, like the risk is higher, right? And so these are the sorts of things that, as an engineer, I spend a lot of time on. I would say also like on the prompting topic, like 90% of my time is spent with the plan. So it's
Yeah.
like, it feels very like wasteful, like when you're spending time with the plan, but you're like, if I build agreement with the model here, then I can just give it to the agent. And that's why I feel confident on looking at the code, because I built the plan, right?
Yeah.
It's just executing already a well-defined thing. I'm not just saying like, hey, build this new feature in VS Code. It's like, no, I very thoughtfully partnered with the model on a very well-specified prompt, and now I'm giving it to go execute. But I've already given it very specific instructions, so I feel very confident in it, right? So I would say like go and try and understand the agent loop with some of the things that I said. And we're also adding something to the VS Code website called VS Code Learn, which is basically going to be like a 0 to hero in agents and like basically stacking these concepts. So once you've kind of done your basic, like I've explored this space a little bit, I recommend going there and you can start to learn some of these techniques a little bit more.
Awesome. Well, I'll be paying attention to that for sure. As we wrap up, I have one last question for you, and it's kind of spicy, so
Sure.
you can dodge or whatever. Obviously, your whole job is about making developers' lives easier when they're using AI, right? I guess that's a summarization, right? And if that's wrong, you can correct me. I guess my question for you is, at what point in time do you think that it is no longer beneficial to the end user the way the based on the tool they're using at the time? And the reason why I ask this is because you folks are doing great work, but I feel like sometimes the tools are getting in the way of being able to solve the problems because there's 1,000 things going on. Like we're talking about having to pay attention to agents and agents
Yep.
calling agents. At what level do you think it just becomes just too complicated for folks? And do we just kind of revert back to I hate this, but like the black box, right? Because I think demystifying is important, but
Yeah.
there's something to say. It's like, don't look at the man behind the curtain, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't understand how any previous abstraction of computing really works, but you wouldn't say that I'm a terrible engineer, I would hope. Like,
I
I
don't I
don't
don't think so at all.
understand the
So
specifics of how like assembly works and like how my instructions that I write in C# are translated to machine code, and that goes to electrical signals on chips and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I view AI. Like we're in the early stages and we're figuring out what abstractions work, right? But like I think it's like the next abstraction of computing. Like I remember when I first started, it was like, oh, if you're not doing your own memory management and threading, then you're not a real programmer,
sure,
right? And now
yeah,
it's like no one's thinking about this, right? And so I feel similarly about AI. Like there is some temporary pain for sure, but I think we'll get to the point that it's like it's just an accepted abstraction, just like anything else in computing. And I'm sure like I can't really imagine, my brain is too small to imagine it, but like there will be another abstraction on top of this, right? And there will be increasing levels of abstraction, I'm sure, because that's what's always happened in our industry. And I think AI is just another example of that. And every single time people freak out and say that everything has changed, and we find new ways to redefine our role and our impact. And that has just happened again and again and again, from punch cards to where we are today.
yeah. Silly question. You obviously don't have a crystal ball. What can you reasonably think of as like that next abstraction? Like obviously in reality, like we're not going to have neural chips at least
Yeah.
soon. But like I guess my like where do you see this potentially going? Like I mean, obviously I see the next kind of wave is like really solid like voice. Like,
Mm.
the cliche like Iron Man sort of scenario. I'm not as
Yeah.
concerned much about AGI or anything like that. I'm caring more about like developer productivity. Like what's like
Yeah.
the next frontier that you could see this somewhat reasonable in the next year?
I think like the biggest thing I see is part of multiple agents and the problems that creates, right? And so I think about this from both spectrums. Like we need a better way to go from like idea to the plan mode is like kind of step one, right? Like can
Sure.
we just get you a better prompt? But can we do better than that, right? Um, and like how can we make it such that that plan is everything that I want it to be, right? And not just like not just the basics, right? Of like, okay, you first implement this, add these lines of code there, but like also like how do I make sure that like things like architecture are correct? The maintainability of the code is good, because that still matters with AI. It matters more actually, right? Same thing with like performance and quality, and like the thing that I'm not sure about is like we kind of are, top 1% of top 1% adopters of AI, and we're seeing the challenge for us now is like what you have an incredible cognitive burden of deciding what to do next, right?
Yeah.
Because the software delivery life cycles have collapsed. So I actually think there's going to be a lot of abstraction like helping with that, right? Like, okay, how does like all of our traditional software like lifecycle practices need to change around ideating on that and defining requirements and things like that, because it's incredibly mentally taxing, right? To have to constantly be doing that every single day. That's actually like the barrier for most people to running more chats at once. Then at the other end, it's like, okay, say you are success. I always ask my team the question like, what happens if we're successful?
Yeah.
Like, what happens if every single person is running, 10, 100 agents at once? What does that actually mean?
Hmm.
Right? Because that helps you to reason about the abstractions you might need, right? So, like, I mean, we're solving a lot of these problems with the tools we have today, but like, we basically had to go spin up a whole team we were already thinking about our engineering system. Now we really have to think about our engineering system, right? Because if we're pushing more throughput through the system, then there's way more risk, right? And so you have to think about like how you make sure that the risk is lower and things like that. So there's things on the edges that I actually think today are the time barriers, and I wonder if we'll get better abstractions for how we handle those things in the future. I think like also just like more tactically, the whole like chat partnership, I'm very unsatisfied with. Like I, it's fine, right? But like I just don't think that we can like you can't scale. You can only scale so much when you have these
Sure.
chats and you're constantly jumping forth between them. So I think like that's an obvious layer of abstraction is like how you remove that. But then once you remove that, there's a whole bunch of other things you have to think about, right? If you're not supervising the agent, you're not supervising the tool calls, right? You need the agent to produce really high quality results for you to have confidence in it. You need it to be able to self-validate its own solution. You need the performance and quality to be high. You need to make sure when the agent is running tool calls that all those tool calls are safe if you're not supervising all the right things happening and then that's happening in a secure environment. So there's a lot of like building blocks that also
Yeah.
need to come into place before you can build the abstraction, right? So those are the sorts of building blocks that we're mostly focused on now as a team. Is like how can we give you the right thing so that you could do that? And then I think as we solve some of those problems, the next layer of abstraction, as we've solved those, will become clear. And then you just keep iterating, right?
Yeah. It seems like, a lot of UIs have like the simple and advanced mode, right? Where it's
Yep.
like you almost need a like I don't care, do the thing mode, and then you need like I
Yep.
want all the dials, I want all the things exposed. And I've seen like some tools have like that sort of experience. It's obviously not 100% right yet, but
Yep.
I do think that there is some in decluttering or denoisification would be super ideal for a lot of cases, but also the ability to, like you said, maybe I want to see like the chain of all of the different calls that are going out because
Yep.
this particular chat call is taking like 4 seconds. Why? It's not doing
Yep.
anything crazy. Oh, it's hitting this one MCP and this MCP is doing some weird thing. Okay, well now I remove that. Okay, it's faster now, right? Makes
Yep.
like
Yep.
sort things like that.
I mean, it's like your build pipeline, right? Like
Sure. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
like most of the time you're just gonna run your build pipeline and you're not gonna like be like, I need to inspect the logs of our build every single time. But also at the same time, like you're gonna jump in and you're gonna say, well, now our builds are taking 10 minutes. They used to take 5 minutes. I need to make this better, right? So like you will occasionally jump in and do those sorts of tweaks. I imagine it'll be similar for agents, right? Like as a whole, like hopefully you don't have to mess with it too much, but there will definitely be times where you want to jump in and say, how can we get some efficiency improvement here? And you go in and you do those explorations and make those improvements. So I suspect we'll have a similar pattern with these agents and chats.
This is great. I just looked at the time. We got to finish up. So, Pierce, this has been great chatting with you. Like, I feel like we could probably talk for another 3 hours about this stuff. I feel like it's a part of
Oh
your
yeah.
job to talk about this stuff. So, um, I really,
I love talking about it.
yeah,
And like it's so interesting because we don't have all the answers, right?
yeah,
It's not like it's like every day is a new day in terms of understanding and what's possible. And so it's like super fun because you're like, what is the next subtraction? I don't know.
yeah,
Like there was ideas 3 months ago I thought were stupid, and now we're doing them in the product, right? So
yeah,
like there's that sort of thing where you're constantly like being humbled by your own inability to even comprehend what the future might look like.
yeah. Uh, long and short, if you're not already following Pierce, like I highly recommend it. There's a great wealth of even when you just post links, super helpful. Like, and also when you post your opinions on things, also. One place is Twitter, so Pierce Boggan,
Yep.
Pierceboggan. There'll be some links to some other spots as well. Like you can look at his GitHub profile, which shows what he's working on these days, which is always fascinating to me. Before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
No, thanks so much for the conversation. I guess like I would encourage people to stay curious, like think about what limiting beliefs you might have. We all have them. And like, are those valid? Or are those things that you need to challenge yourself on? Yeah, if you do those two things and you stay curious and you're willing to explore these new ideas, then I think you will do very, very well in this new agentic engineering future. I feel confident in that.
And follow Pierce. Just do that too.
Yeah, and follow me,
Yeah.
right?
We all got to catch to Burke. He's got like 100,000 followers now. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I'm never gonna catch Burke. He's way ahead of me. It's not gonna happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Pierce, and thanks for the folks who are watching live and the folks listening in the future. My name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. From my friend Pierce. Take care.